Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the brief history and geography of Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan, as you can see, is a landlocked country in kind of northern Central Asia. You can see it's bordered by Kazakhstan up here. It has this border with China here. It has a border with Tajikistan, which is very oddly shaped, and Uzbekistan as well. This whole border here. It's a very weird little section of geography right here. Let's talk about it real quick. This part down here of Kyrgyzstan is mainly known as the Fergana Valley. And you can see this, and this are little exclaves. These two belong to Uzbekistan. This one belongs to Tajikistan. And it's really complicated how these borders were all drawn up. It mainly has to do with the main ethnic groups in the area, which are the Kyrgyz, the Uzbeks, and the Tajiks, right? It's all very kind of mixed up in here. So when the countries were formed and lines were drawn, they were trying to encompass the majority ethnic groups as much as possible. It's kind of a mess. So that's why it looks like how it does down here. While we're down here, we're going to talk a little bit about the Fergana Valley and its history. But it is the most fertile part of Kyrgyzstan. It's very fertile, actually. And that's mainly due to the mountains that dominate the rest of Kyrgyzstan. As you can see, it's incredibly mountainous. I think it was 80% of the country is mountains. The main mountain chain you can see is the Tian Shan mountain range that just slices right through. There's many other different ranges of the Tian Shan and various other ranges that crisscross through, but that's the dominant one. The highest peak is right here. It has a bunch of different names. In Kyrgyzstan, it's known as Genghis Choksu, but it's right on the border with China, so China has names like every country has a name for this mountain. But there are lots of other very large peaks all throughout Kyrgyzstan. Incredibly mountainous and very, very forested as well. Very lush, untouched forests. The other main important geographic region is this big old lake up here. This is Issyk-Kul, and it is the second highest lake in the world after Lake Titicaca, and it's a saline lake, saltwater lake. Kyrgyzstan has a couple major cities. Bishkek is the largest, its capital city. There's also Osh and Jalalabad. Also major cities. Karakol is another big one. But it's kind of one of those countries when I say large city, it's not like a massive metropolitan area. It's a city, but compared to other cities, it's small. And let me see also. Oh, you can see lots of rivers. There's lots of rivers that go through. The longest is the Narin, which kind of slices the country almost in half. You can see right there. There's over 80 different lakes all throughout Kyrgyzstan. This one's a reservoir. It's pretty big, actually. And yeah, it's a very beautiful country. Normally, I would show pictures of you, but like with all my other countries, I have a book coming in from the library, a brand new book about Kyrgyzstan. So once that book comes into my library, we'll come back and I'll show you pictures. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous country. But let's dive into its history. So the first major power in this region would have been the Scythian Empire, which I've mentioned quite a bit whenever I bring up this corner of the world. They were a very large empire in its time, but by 840 CE, the Kyrgyz people rose up. They were currently dominated by the Uyghur Khaganate, and the Kyrgyz means 40 tribes, essentially. That's what I'm told. So the many different tribes all throughout this area that were under control of this sort of empire were united by a man named Manas. And Manas is an incredibly important figure in Kyrgyz history. So he combined the 40 tribes, they rose up, defeated the empire that was under control of them, and they established their own land. And Manas has like almost everything named after him. There's even, you can see the Manas mountain right here. It's a very beloved figure, and the Epic of Manas was written about him, obviously. And it is the world's longest poem. It's one of those epic, like, Odyssey, Gilgamesh style poems. Very, very cool. So the people here just kind of lived their own lives. They lived in their yurts up in the mountains, doing their own thing. Till the 12th century, the Mongols came in and invaded. But by 1207, they had sort of integrated with the Mongols and became part of the Mongol Empire, and it became sort of part of their identity to be like mixed in with the Mongol culture, so to say. Over time, parts of what is today Kyrgyzstan came under different powers. The main one in the 18th century would have been China, or Qing China, as it was known during the Qing dynasty. And by the early 19th century, parts were under the Khanate of Kokand, which was an Uzbek empire, which obviously we'll talk about when we get to Uzbekistan. Much later, Qing China ceded part of its territory to Russia, and over time, all of Kyrgyzstan was incorporated into the Russian Empire. That was finished by 1876, and the Kyrgyz people, for the most part, did not like the Russian-dominated culture. A lot left for Afghanistan or China, especially after a really huge uprising in 1916 against the Russians. But in 1919, the Soviet Union became a thing, and Kyrgyzstan became a Soviet oblast, it's called, sort of like a state in the Soviet Union. And in 1936, the Kyrgyz SSR was established. So it was its official Soviet state in the Soviet Union. And during this time, life became more modernized, Soviet style. Lots of schools being built, farming, all the bells and whistles of advanced society, so to say. However, in the 1990s, there were some tensions between the Kyrgyz and the Uzbeks down in this Fergana Valley region. It got really bad. There was a big surge of it in Osh, and there were lots of riots as well. Mainly over, farmland and things like that. But it became a whole thing. An independence movement started to rise up at this time. There was a referendum, though, in 1990, I believe, to see if it should stay with the Soviet Union or start moving toward independence, and 88.7% of the vote wanted to stay with the Soviet Union. But in 1991, it was uncovered that the Soviets were planning a coup of the current president, Askar Akayev, and he and his whole cabinet resigned from the Communist Party. And on August 31st, 1991, the Republic of Kyrgyzstan was established. And obviously good timing, too, because the Soviet Union collapsed not long after that. So life kind of stayed as it was in Kyrgyzstan. It was good but not great, so to say, in terms of infrastructure, quality of life, farming, things like that. Then in 2005, people were really tired of the corruption at the high levels of the government, and the Tulip Revolution sparked. And the revolutions in Kyrgyzstan were not very peaceful. They were very, burn down buildings, loot stores, people losing their lives, things like that. Akayev, the president, was deposed, and the next president that took over was also deposed in 2010. There were even bigger riots, not just over corruption, but over the rising housing prices as well. The president actually fled the country. And also during 2010, there were more ethnic tensions over in Osh. It's theorized there's been a lot of investigations into it from Kyrgyzstan and the United Nations and things like that, whether it was staged, it could have been purposefully started by gangs or organized crime families. The upper echelons of the government had a lot of people involved in organized crime, apparently, hence all of the revolts. People just got tired of it. But the tension sort of lingered up into 2020 when there was an election and people were very upset over the results, with sort of more of the like crime syndicate people being elected. The president resigned during that time, and in 2021, after another round of elections to try to change the government, the constitution was changed to give more power to the president, so that it wouldn't be in the hands of so many people who were involved in like gangs or the mafia, so to say. Also in 2021, over here in the Fergana Valley, there's been a lot of conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan at the borders here over water and water distribution, and one side accusing the other of spying on them. People have lost their lives in the riots, and it's an ongoing thing. It's actually really quite violent. It's been a little bit more violent than the other riots and revolutions that have happened in Kyrgyzstan. And people are worried about war, like it's getting to that point. So it's one of those things that we'll see where it goes from there. But in a nutshell, that's the history of Kyrgyzstan. I'm really sorry it's short, but it's been a brief history. The like ancient times history was pretty straightforward for like hundreds of years. So the interesting historical things didn't really happen until like the 1900s, so to say. But if you want to take one thing out of Kyrgyz history, it's Manas. They love Manas. There's statues everywhere. Like I said, anything that could have a name, it's named after him. The largest airport is Manas Airport. There's universities, landmarks, buildings, everything you can imagine is named after Manas, essentially. So that's like the person to take away from Kyrgyz history, is how Manas formed the country. And the flag of Kyrgyzstan, I'll put it up here, but it has a big sun in the middle with 40 rays coming out of it, which represents the 40 tribes that were united by Manas. It's like a big deal to the people here. It's a huge part of their identity. And yes, Kyrgyzstan does have that culture of bride kidnapping. It's I mentioned one of my friends that I was filming about this country, and they're like, oh, isn't that the bride kidnapping country? And it's like, yes, it's mainly practiced out in the villages and things like that. And apparently today it's more like if a couple's dating and they want to get married, they'll have like a kidnapping where the lady's like, oh no, don't. Oh, you know, it's like just like kind of faking it for the sake of tradition. But back in its ancient times, it was tradition to kidnap the woman you wanted to marry and force her to marry you. But it's sort of a mixed thing in Kyrgyzstan, where one side it's frowned upon hugely, obviously it's kidnapping, but the other is like, this is part of our culture, it has been for thousands of years. It's a tricky little subject there, but that's not really, I think, what most Kyrgyz people want you to take away from this country. It's mostly their identity. They have their yurts, they have their mountains, and they love dancing and festivals and celebrating things like that. So I'm gonna leave it there for tonight. Like I said, we will come back to Kyrgyzstan to look at some beautiful pictures and read from the book that I'm going to get, and we'll learn a lot more then. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good